How's it going everyone, Blueknight here and welcome back to another Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart video. So for those who are familiar with the series, you'd know that the franchise is kinda known for its arsenal of over-the-top crazy weapons, ranging from your standard blaster weapons to a lava gun, morphing weapons to robotic allies, even a topiary sprinkler that turns enemies into, well, topiary plants. Ratchet & Clank basically covers every basis for out-of-this-world weaponry, and since Rift Apart is releasing within the PS5's launch window, and since almost every game in the franchise has kept the tradition of having at least a few returning weapons from previous games, I thought I'd quickly go over the top 10 weapons that I would personally like to see return in the upcoming dimension-shattering adventure. But before I do that, I just need to make two quick notes. Number one is that I don't expect all of them to return, and the reason I chose 10 weapons and not 5 is because I had a really hard time choosing just 5 weapons that I really liked. I mean, can you blame me? They're all really good. Okay, maybe except for the Infector, that one kinda sucked. While the other note is that certain weapons from past games like the Bomb Glove, Blitz Cannon, or the Dual Raptors that have been revamped numerous times throughout the series, with the likes of the Shatter Bomb, Burst Pistol, and the Enforcer from Rift Apart being prime examples of such revamps. So these weapon classes won't be included in this list, but anything else that we haven't seen a revamped version of yet in Rift Apart is included. And I'm not going to mention the Rhino because a new one pretty much exists in every single game except for Deadlocked, so I'm just going to assume that Rift Apart is going to continue this trend. Now without further ado, let's get started with number 10, the Nightmare Box. Basically this weapon is used to frighten the nearby enemies, virtually paralyzing them. By utilizing nightmares from a parallel universe, hence the name, or the enemies can simply attack these nightmares instead of you, acting kinda like a better version of the decoy glove from the first game. Upgrading this weapon to the Terrorizer in Into the Nexus allows it to explode after scaring the nearby enemies, fire phantom shots at enemies, and even allowing for more than one nightmare to be used at once with the Gold Army Raritanium upgrade, all coming together to create one of the creepiest weapons in the series, which was rather fitting for Into the Nexus's more spooky tone, but maybe not so much for Rift Apart's more traditional Ratchet & Clank tone and atmosphere. Regardless of that, I'd like to see this weapon at least make a comeback in some sort of way in Rift Apart, if possible. Number 9, the Winterizer. This weapon can morph nearby enemies into snowmen, all decked out with hats, scarves, and candy canes, with each and every one of them being different from one another, a feature that Insomniac Games came up with in a last-minute hustle before the launch of Into the Nexus. Later, it can be upgraded to the Blizzomatic, which unleashes a Frost Nova wave after morphing an enemy to morph other nearby enemies. With Raritanium upgrades, the affected enemies can drop presents containing additional bolts, health, and ammo. I had so much fun using this weapon in Into the Nexus, mainly because it was probably the most entertaining entry of the morphing class of weapons in the series, despite using ammo, unlike other morphing class weapons, so minus a few points for that. And not only would this weapon fill in the morphing weapon quota in Rift Apart, which unfortunately could be a problem because the Topiary Sprinkler sort of does the same thing, by turning the enemies into topiary plants, each one being unique, just like the Winterizer concept. But it once again fit right into the holiday season that the game is quite possibly releasing in, which is the PS5's launch window. And I mean, come on, Into the Nexus didn't even have a snow level, so that we can just litter the entire level with snowman enemies. It would have been perfect. But if I can make a suggestion on how to improve this weapon, if it returned in Rift Apart, is to make a slight nod to the Spyro the Dragon franchise by having the affected enemies turn into these monster snowmen from Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon. Albeit on a much smaller scale, it'd be the perfect way for Insomniac to pay homage to its roots from the PS1 days. Number 8, the Lava Gun. This weapon originated from Ratchet & Clank 2 and returned again in Ratchet & Clank 3 the following year, with a much better upgrade in the form of the Liquid Nitrogen gun, which instantly freezes affected enemies that come into contact with the, well, liquid nitrogen. If you haven't noticed by now, I am a pretty big fan of anything icy or snowy themed, but this weapon was easily one of the funner ones to use in the original trilogy, just mainly for how overpowered it was, despite its rather limited range until unlocking the lock-on mod, because then it gets a whole lot funner to use. Number 7, the Rift Inducer. I mean, come on, the game is called Rift Apart for crying out loud. they gotta include this one. This weapon was originally created for Ratchet Clank 2, but got replaced by the Bouncer due to being so overpowered. So, it instead debuted in Ratchet & Clank 3 the following year. The Rift Inducer, later upgrading to the Rift Ripper, creates a black hole capable of sucking up enemies, but placing multiple black holes together can create one massive black hole, making no enemy, except for bosses and dropships, safe from its shockingly strong pull. And just like the lava liquid nitrogen gun, this was easily one of the best weapons from the original trilogy and one of my personal favorites. Now arguably this weapon was already sort of revamped in Into the Nexus with the Vortex Grenade, which also creates a black hole capable of sucking up enemies, but the difference being is that the Rift Inducer gets rid of the enemies in one swift go. The Vortex Grenade, or the upgraded Singularity Grenade, only really keeps them suspended in mid-air, so you can easily take care of them without any resistance. Let's also not confuse the Rift Inducer or the Rift Ripper with the Rift Inducer 3000 or Rift Ripper 3000 from A Crack in Time, as this punches a hole into only one dimension where a giant octopus-like creature called Fred, yeah, that's his name, emerges and starts grabbing up nearby enemies. This technically already exists in Rift Apart, as here you can see Fred grabbing up some nearby enemies, but not by Ratchet summoning it using this weapon. So for this reason alone, we can assume that this weapon might not return in the game. But since the game focuses on rifts, it'd be the perfect weapon to bring back. Even though its focus is on creating black holes and not dimensional rifts, I think it can still be weaved somewhere into the game's new rift mechanics. Number 6. The Plasma Whip. This weapon originated in Ratchet & Clank 3 and was likely inspiration for other melee-based weapons in the franchise, like the Scorpion Flail from Deadlocked, the Never Beast from Into the Nexus, and the Shock Ravager from Tools of Destruction, which is basically a revamped version of the Plasma Whip, albeit not as cool looking. The Plasma Whip later upgrades to the Quantum Whip, which sends out waves of energy far beyond the normal reach of the whip. I included this one in here because it's a very unique weapon that very much functions like Ratchet's Omni Wrench, but doing so much more in terms of combat. Plus, extra points just for looking really cool. Number 5. The Suck Cannon. This weapon first debuted in the original game on the PS2 and returned again in Ratchet & Clank 3, allowing it to be upgraded to the Vortex Cannon and becoming one of the more classic weapons in the Ratchet & Clank series. In fact, it was one of the first weapons ever designed for the series, capable of sucking up smaller enemies and even crates just to shoot them back at other enemies as blazing fireballs is all just so satisfying to do. And the best part is, it doesn't cost anything to refill this thing, so it's absolutely free to use, making it really handy for when you've used all your ammo for every other weapon in your arsenal. However, this class of weapon has really gone underused throughout the series ever since Up Your Arsenal, with the exception of the VAC-U 4000 gadget from All For One, which only really served a purpose for the game's multiplayer aspect and not as a weapon. So bringing this classic weapon back in Rift Apart would be an absolutely genius move on Insomniac's part, but if it doesn't, then that kinda sucks. Yeah, I know, terrible joke. Number 4. The Pixelizer. This weapon made its debut in the 2016 reimagining, capable of turning enemies into 2D pixely images resembling a classic-styled video game, which, according to Insomniac, was one of the hardest challenges in the game's overall development. Basically, this functions as a shotgun-class weapon, and to be honest, I don't really think that this one is going to make it into Rift Apart, considering that this weapon class is already occupied by the Enforcer. Still, I think that this weapon at least deserves another chance to shine, and who knows, with the PS5's backward compatibility with the PS4 games, maybe this can be unlocked or at least discounted via a cross-save type of thing. Something that hasn't really existed in the series since A Crack in Time, but it's still an interesting idea nonetheless. Number 3. The Plasma Coil. Easily one of my all-time favorite weapons in the franchise, along with being one of the more useful and powerful weapons in the original trilogy, especially when upgraded to the Plasma Storm, as it can shock any enemy no matter how far away they are with arcing electrical shocks. Very useful for clearing out hordes of enemies at once, or really any other circumstance you can possibly think of. And in Rift Apart, if this was to come back, I can just imagine sending a blast through one of the rift types that we haven't seen yet, yet, and it winds up behind a group of unsuspecting enemies without you ever having to get caught in the crossfire. That'd be a really cool way of implementing another type of rift to provide more tactical advantages with these weapons. Number 2, the bouncer. Okay, I'm sure some of you already seen this one coming, given just how classically overpowered this weapon is, especially in its upgraded mega bouncer state. For those who don't know, the bouncer unleashes a foray of explosive bouncing balls, capable of wiping out hordes of enemies and being really effective against bosses. The bouncer first made its debut in Ratchet Clank 2, then reappeared again in Ratchet Clank 3, and then appeared for the third time in the series in the 2016 PS4 reimagining, but unfortunately, it was exclusive to just being a pre-order bonus for anyone outside of Japan, where for some reason is still available but as a paid DLC. And that kinda sucks for anyone outside of Japan that wanted and still wants to experience this classic weapon but didn't get to pre-order the game. Now I'm really hoping that this locking a specific weapon behind a pre-order bonus situation does not happen again with Rift Apart, because it's really an unfair marketing tactic. Sure, Into the Nexus had a pre-order for a specific set of armor, but that's kinda different considering that we have several armor options already in the game. I can understand maybe like a set of pins or figures being a pre-order bonus, but not actual in-game content like a fan favorite weapon, and then nobody can get it afterward. Just no. But I'm curious as to people who managed to get the bouncer via pre-ordering the PS4 game, how are they going to be able to get it on the PS5, seeing as the codes expired way back in 2018, if I remember correctly, therefore making it virtually impossible to get the bouncer when playing the PS4 reimagining on the PS5 outside of Japan. And like I mentioned earlier, if they include some sort of cross-save feature due to the backward compatibility feature of the PS5 to give discounts on weapons in Rift Apart that were featured in the PS4 reimagining, like the Pixelizer and the bouncer, just like what Insomniac did in both the classic series and the future saga, I would be perfectly okay with something like that. Just please, no more weapons exclusively locked behind pre-orders. That's all I ask. And with that, we come to the number 1 weapon on this list, and that is the Groovatron. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of you definitely seen this one coming, and can you really blame me for putting this at number 1? Okay, come on, this was easily one of the funniest weapons that Insomniac has ever came up with in the history of the series, as it literally works on every single enemy and boss that comes across it, virtually breaking the game by making them dance uncontrollably as you just blast them into oblivion. Okay, so it's ridiculously overpowered, but I can definitely see why Insomniac kept on using it over and over again throughout the future saga and the PS4 reimagining. And of course, I'm aware of that one trophy where you have to use the Groovatron on literally every single type of enemy in the game. Yeah, I can definitely see that as an absolute pain to do. So yeah, maybe not have that as a trophy, and to make it not as overpowered, reduce the overall max ammo capacity, because otherwise I can see the game becoming way too easy. But hey, at least we'll have some extra catchy tunes to listen to throughout the game, so that's a plus. And with that, guys, that's pretty much everything I've got for this list of weapons that I hope to see in Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. Like I said at the start of the video, I don't expect all of them to get into the game. Maybe a select few, like how they were handled in previous games, but that's about it. And I know that there are lots of other weapons that did not make it onto this list, but definitely deserve to have another appearance in Rift Apart, like the Never Beast, Never Blades, HK-22 Seeker, and many others. But for the sake of not making this video way too long, I just decided to stick to 10 weapons only, and even that was difficult. But in the comments section below, I'm curious as to what weapons would you guys want to see in Rift Apart. And also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more Ratchet & Clank content coming your way. If you guys stuck through the entire video, you're awesome, and I really do appreciate the support. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I've been Blueknight, and I'll see you guys back here next time.